Always a moment of anticipation. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Destination the Show, episode 9. Jamie Cameron here with my guy, Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's up with you, man? What's new?
Not a whole lot. Just a regular old Tuesday night. Transition from coaching football to coaching third grade basketball,
Good
and
Lord.
that's my life right now.
Right on.
So I'm at my house. Obviously, you're not so
I'm
much.
not. I'm not. I want you to just appreciate the things that I do for this podcast relationship because I am coming to everybody from Allentown, Pennsylvania, where I'm stationed for work for the next couple of days. Brought my podcast mic with me, so that's my level of dedication to the show, man.
Super committed, man.
Super,
Super.
super committed. What's new with you? Anything else? Anything else interesting before we dig into all of the baseball things?
I don't think so. I think I'm ready to talk ball.
All right, let's do it, man. Um, Super excited for today's episode. We are going to cover a couple topics for you guys. We are thick in the middle of the MLB playoffs, so we'll cover some news. We're going to do some AFL updates for each org, following on from our kind of preview episode a couple of weeks back. Friendly reminder you can catch great and more in depth updates at Twins Daily Brewer Fanatic and Northside Baseball. And this is kind of why I'm excited for today. I think we can officially dub this episode 9 as our first ever mailbag. Makes
Let's
me feel
go.
legit. Um, People really came through with a ton of interesting questions. So we're going to try and knock out as many of those as we possibly can. Housekeeping, drop us a follow on Twitter at DTS underscore pod one. Anything you can do to support the show, downloads, retweets, positive reviews, we appreciate it all. We have had some very kind messages this week um, from people letting us know that they are enjoying the content so far. So thank you guys. We really appreciate it. Jeremy, got to start with some news because I always like to bring an item to the table for discussion. Here it is this week. Kim Ng out as GM of the Marlins. She declined her mutual option after the Marlins picked up their end. What do you make of this? What's the deal? Surprising, uncool, brutal? What's your take on this, man?
Yeah. So I guess, like I mentioned a couple episodes ago, sometimes I don't get to keep up on what's happening on Twitter real time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm scrolling through, I see that she didn't pick up her mutual option, which people immediately jump to the conclusion that she's jumping ship. But
Mm-hmm.
shortly after that, it comes out that actually she was going to be essentially replaced,
Insane.
demoted, and she wasn't having that, which is 100% understandable from her perspective, right? Essentially getting demoted, being a tough pill to swallow. She's just led her team to the playoffs. Um, so I'm really genuinely curious where she ends up, right? Trailblazing woman, first GM, first female GM in professional sports.
Mm-hmm.
And in the world of professional sports, there's this recycling that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like a GM that's not very good gets another shot, a coach or manager that's not very good gets another shot, where you don't necessarily have these new upcoming names um, that get an opportunity as quickly. And maybe baseball's been a little bit better than the other sports as far as that goes. But I'm really interested to see how it works out for her. She's really climbed the ladder. I believe
Mm-hmm.
she became an assistant GM. Maybe the Yankees were the first team or the second team in the late 90s and worked in that as an assistant GM till 2011 before moving on and working pretty high up in Major League Baseball, and then finally getting a shot a couple years ago as the Marlins GM. So she certainly deserves to get another opportunity very, very high up in an organization. I'm just curious how to see, to see how this works out, because most GMs end up getting another job quickly. Is it going to be different because she's a woman? You'd hope the answer is no, but in a profession where it's mostly white Americans,
Mm-hmm.
males, how is Kimming gonna, what's the next step gonna be? That's the most fascinating for me. I applaud what she did, saying, "Hey, I'm out." Good for her for doing it. I'm just really genuinely curious to see what happens next.
Yeah, for sure. Good overview, man. I mean, from an optics point of view for the Marlins, this is wild, right? Like, you're going to essentially demote her after she got the Marlins, the Miami Marlins, uh, to their first full season playoff berth since 2003, I think, 20 years. And the Marlins weren't a great team. They're pretty easily, comfortably the worst team in the playoffs, I think, but still, that is absolutely wild. There are open positions, most notably the Red Sox, which, in related news, one Thad Levine has been apparently in Boston interviewing for that job. Um, so let me ask you like a bonus follow up question, and I too will be tracking Kim Ing's next move and excited to see where she winds up. If Thad Levine ends up as the new GM or Pobo of the Boston Red Sox, not exactly sure what the title is there, what's your level of concern or not as a Twins fan?
If you'd have asked me this question 3 years ago when Levine was far more in the public eye,
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have had a little bit more concern. I don't remember Thad Levine really being in the news at all,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, where it's been Derek Felvey basically doing everything.
For
And
sure.
really Thad Levine, who we knew was number two, being more of a silent number two. I'm sure he was still doing a lot of the same work, but as far as press conferences, talking on record, like that stuff just didn't seem to happen, which for me was a little disappointing because I always appreciated his humor, his
Yeah.
use of very big words. And so to me, those were things that uh, I just think I'd have less of a concern now. And the Twins do a really good job of plucking people from other organizations
Mm-hmm.
that I think they would have a really good opportunity to either promote from within or find that next big name that could then step into that job and really be groomed to go do that job then for somebody else. But I think that's a thing that Derek Falvey's done really well is he hires people that are good. He helps them learn and then off they go, and which is really what you want from someone that you work for, right?
For sure. For sure. I agree. Level of concern for me is minimal. I'm sure the Twins have a good succession plan in place. Did see a few suggestions about Kim Ing possibly coming to Minnesota, but I think, like, no, I hope she doesn't because that would be a number two role. And what she's shown is she wants and deserves a number one role. So, a lot of moving pieces in the off season front office puzzle. Looking forward to tracking those. Um, as we get further into the off season. All right, let's fire it up, man. We're going to talk a little bit of AFL and provide some updates. Things are looking better for some of us than they are for others. Um, we're going to do some updates on some of the players that we previewed for each organization a couple of weeks back. We each kind of made a pick, right, of an interesting prospect to track. The AFL is 2 weeks in, so it's still a pretty small sample size, but we'll go org by org and kind of update how our respective guys, so to speak, are doing, and then just walk through any notes on other notable prospects. So we'll start with the Twins. We're going to start with the Twins because their crop is the least interesting by far, I think. Remind everyone, Jeremy, who is your player to focus on, and how are they doing through 2 weeks?
So for me and the Twins, it was Aaron Sabato, and not because I expected Aaron Sabato to go to the AFL and become the next big thing, but because I was really interested to see if he could do something to
Yeah,
help reignite that prospect flame that has burned to a very, very, very not lit
a nub.
wick, right? And he hasn't. It's been kind of brutal. He hit a home run, I believe, in his first game, which
Okay.
I was like, okay, good for him. Since then, well, in total, 6 for 37,
Mm.
10 games. He's drawn 5 walks to give himself an OBP that I think starts with the 2, but struck out 17 times,
Wow.
which on a scale from 0 to Emmanuel Rodriguez, it's pretty high up there,
You
right?
just keep doing that. It'll
I
come
will.
back to bite you.
He's doubled 3 times. He's hit a home run, so his slugging's been okay. But his OPS is 586.
Yeah.
And I think he's done exactly what the Twins worried he would do, or at least what I worried he would do. And Aaron Sabato is going to, basically become organizational filler until he's a free agent, and then off he goes.
Yep. I think I agree with that assessment. So my guy for the Twins, Andrew Cassetti, I got to give him an incomplete grade, even though he's not off to a great start. He's only appeared in 5 games so far, 17 at bats, 435 OPS. It's nothing to write home about. He has hit a home run. Just talking about really small sample sizes, still believe in and am excited by the OBP ability. And I think he is a perfect AFL candidate. So I'm excited to kind of follow up on him in another couple of weeks here.
Question.
Yo.
Has he been catching?
He has. I gotta check. The maybe producer Theo can do a quick check for us. He's definitely appeared at catcher, but not exclusively. I think because, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin Parada is also on his team. Another kind of tweener catcher type.
Right. Because the reason I ask is Andrew Cassetti, catcher, is much more appealing as a prospect than Andrew Cassetti, first base, DH,
absolutely,
hitter, whatever. So to me, that's the big question, and maybe the reason why he's only been in 5 games. And even if you're not playing, but you're getting coaching from different,
for sure,
developed coaches, that to me is way more important developmentally than to look and say, yeah, 435 OPS. If they're going to develop him as a catcher, this becomes a much bigger deal, regardless of how he hits the ball, because he's going to hit.
Yep, agreed. That's a great point. I think there's a ton of benefit to being at the AFL beyond just game time, right? Like you mentioned, coaching, exposure to other players, other orgs, other prospects. So for sure, we'll keep track of that a little more closely next time. One quick Twin standout I want to mention, left-handed pitcher Jordan Carr, a really interesting case, kind of like a classic Twins prospect, undrafted free agent in 2021. He's now 26. He was signed as a free agent out of the College of Charleston. He's now at Double-A, old, obviously, for that level at 26. I think these numbers are actually slightly out of date now, but last I checked, 8 innings pitched, 1.13 ERA, 0.75 WHIP, 4 Ks, and he's just made good progress at every level. They've given him kind of a full season at each level. So 2022 at Fort Myers, 3.84 ERA, walked a lot of guys, 22.5%, and only 16.9 K percentage. This year at High A, 1.48 ERA, walking only 13.7, so about a 9% improvement there, and striking out 24.8% of hitters. Kind of throws from a weird 3/4 in betweeny arm slot, has some good breaking stuff. So just probably an under the radar Twins prospect who's absolutely tearing it up so far in the AFL. So good for him.
And old enough to be some of his teammates' dads.
That's right. Let's move on to the Brewers. Jeremy, your guy was Eric Brown Jr. How is he doing so far?
Yeah, so really picked him again, similar to Sabato, but not, with the downward trajectory, that Sabato's had. And that whole team is hitting the ball really well. So I think that kind of downgrades Brown a little bit just because it doesn't stick out. 333, 429, 476 for a 905 OPS.
Nice.
14 for 42, 4 doubles, a triple, 5 stolen bases, 11 strikeouts to 7 walks. But that whole lineup, you look at the stats, and you're like, is this a leaderboard for the league? That team. And how much easier is hitting when there's guys on base? Like
Yep.
you're seeing guys out of the stretch, or it's the whole contagious thing where guys get hits and so but great for for him, great for the Brewers, great for the other teams that are playing there, because what this can really be for Brown and for many others is a springboard into spring training, where
Mm-hmm.
you go against the best quality that you've seen as a professional and do well. You leave there thinking, okay, I'm a baseball player.
Yep.
Any adult that you had from a bad long season is now erased, and you're pretty confident coming into the spring. So that's where I think Eric Brown should be now. Obviously, there's season left to go.
For sure. For sure. A hot start for him. An update from producer Theo on Cassetti. He's got 3 of the 5 games he's appeared in. So it looks, I think that's what we'd expect from an AFL roster with maybe 3 catchers on it, is splitting that time fairly evenly. My Brewers guys, Henry Mendez is someone who I highlighted as kind of like a guy who had performed well, was young for his age level, and had a minuscule strikeout number, but needed to work on elevating the ball. And that is absolutely borne out. Again, in a small sample size, only hitting 190, 292, 286 for a 578 on base percentage. So a slow start for him. Also had given a kind of honorable mention to Justin King, 386 ERA, 086 whip in limited action with 1 walk. And I think the kind of note we made on Justin King was control needs to improve. Walks need to be limited. So a solid start for him, but definitely Eric Brown Jr., guy there, I think, is the pick of the bunch for the Brewers so far. And that's what you would want, I think, if you're a Brewers fan. Cubs. Okay, let's move on to the Cubs. Cubs, I think, when we talked about them in advance of the AFL starting, right, we said, like, this is by far the most interesting prospect group of the 3 orgs. I'll go first for the Cubs so you can, build up some good, like, gloating energy for when you get to talk about your guy. So Kevin Alcantara was my pick. I think things that we talked about with him was just like massive power, incredible athletic frame, a lot of Ks, a lot of power. Can he keep his swing short enough so that the hit tool is not a big limitation? And I think he's been as advertised so far. 212, 289, 424, 713 OPS is average, has hit 2 long home runs, struck out 11 times, but a lot of loud noises when he makes contact with the baseball. And I think a little bit of inconsistency in his early performance is probably to be expected. Extremely excited about him. He is a kind of consensus top 100 guy. So at least a solid start for Alcantara. But Jeremy, how about your Cubs guy?
Yeah, I went with James Triantis, and a middle infielder, a guy with a hit tool, but not necessarily a defensive home. And I believe what I said was I feel like the Cubs would send him to see if he could hit, because with what they have in their system and what they probably need to add to compete, could be a guy that teams take notice of, and maybe his trade value goes up. So far, 455, 571,
Dang,
788,
that's wild.
1359 OPS in 9 games, 33 at bats. So in 33 at bats, 15 hits, which is more than Aaron Savato's had since the calendar turned to 2023.
Wow.
2 doubles, 3 triples, 1 home run, 7 strikeouts to 7 walks.
Wow.
Super impressive. 3 stolen bases. So if there was any doubt about what type of prospect he was coming into the AFL, there's no doubt anymore. Like, he's going to be a legit, probably, top 10 in a very strong system with the trajectory that's going up. And if you're a Cubs fan, that's what you love to see. Even though the defensive home's a question. Maybe he ends up as a second baseman. Maybe Matt Shaw is that guy, right? But the depth and having guys, and we've seen it as Twins fans, having depth with guys that can just barrel the ball
Mhm.
is always valuable, and you can use those guys to go get other guys.
That's yep.
And I think that's where the Cubs have kind of struck gold here, because they already have Dansby Swanson. He's gonna man shortstop. So Shaw is now can be versatile, and anybody that you can add to that equation is only going to be good for that whole organization.
For sure. For sure, I'll be interested in the Cubs winter and less interested in their spending and more interested in whether they make any deals in what is a not very exciting free agent class kind of across the board. Speaking of strong systems, I want to kind of like tease something for a future episode and toyed around with the idea of kind of talking through this for like 20 minutes, but it deserves its own episode. So, and the reason I think it does is this should be uniformly exciting news for Twins, Cubs, and Brewers fans. So, justbaseball.com released their end of season top 100 prospects. Aaron Layton, if folks are not familiar with him, is a great follow on Twitter, does a tremendous job of compiling this list throughout the season. A really nice mix of kind of like scouting info, data, and looking at prospects kind of outputs. So here's my question for you, Jeremy. You have not seen this top 100 list, correct?
Correct.
Excellent. So my question for you is how many prospects do you think each organization, Twins, Cubs, and Brewers, has in this top 100?
So my guess was that each organization has 3 top 100 prospects.
Okay.
And I'm just shooting from the hip, because once you get past prospect 50, it could be literally anybody, right? So I feel pretty confident that the Twins have 3, because I don't know that they have anybody after the top 50. But then beyond that, I'm really like, yeah, 3-ish, maybe 4. But I'm going to stick with 3 across the board.
That's a solid guess, and you are, in the case of the Twins, correct that there is 3. I'm about to, in our running order here, drop the prospects from each org and their position in the top 100 so we can get kind of a live look at this. And the reason this is worthy, I think, of an episode is not only the sheer number of prospects that the Cubs and Brewers have in their system, it's also the position of these guys. And I think this is one of the reasons I really like this Just Baseball ranking, a little bit different from some of the others that folks might most often use, BA, MLB Pipeline, and so on and so forth. But I would encourage folks to check it out. So here's a rundown, and I'll get your take in a second. Twins, as you mentioned, 3. Emmanuel Rodriguez, your least favorite prospect, is at number 30. Outfielder currently at Double-A. Brooks Lee is the 28th overall prospect on this top 100. Infielder at Triple-A, likely to debut in the majors next year. Walker Jenkins, number 5 overall pick in the 2023 MLB draft, is the 10th best prospect in baseball. Finished the season at Fort Myers. For the Cubs, they have 5 guys in the top 100, and their highest ranked guy is 51st overall. Jeez, talk about spoiled. Matt Shaw, a 51 infielder at Double-A. Kevin Alcantara, aforementioned number 46, also at Double-A. Owen Casey, he's 29th overall, an outfielder at Double-A. Cade Horton, who you've talked about several times on the pod. He's 21st overall, starting pitcher at Double-A. They got a lot of dudes at Double-A. The Cubs are going to be really interesting really soon. And Pete Crow Armstrong, we have mourned over his major league playing time, is number 18, has made his debut, but we've kind of listed him at Triple-A. Brewers, last but not least, also have 5 guys. No one lower than 64. Tyler Black, 64, third baseman at Triple-A. Luis Lara, outfielder, number 62. He's at High A. Jacob Mizorowski, 50th overall, starting pitcher at Double-A. Jefferson Cuero, number 26 overall, a catcher at AA, and Jackson Churio, number 3 overall, an outfielder at AA. Thoughts, reactions, any surprises from what I just dropped? You're looking puzzled, which means
Yeah.
either you're in awe or there's certain things that you might disagree with.
So Jenkins at 10 seems aggressive. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying that seems aggressive. Maybe at midseason next year, I'd be like, okay, what he's done is a relatively small sample.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were a believer coming into the draft, you may have had him there. I'd assume that also means that Skeens, Langford, and Cruz
Cruz. Yeah.
are top 9 prospects.
I have the list. I can
So
tell you
that
exactly where they are if you want.
as long as that's the case, I think that's fine because Jenkins was the 4th best prospect in the draft.
Langford is 4.
Makes sense.
Cruz is 7. Skeens is 8.
Okay.
And
So I
Max
have no-
Clark is 27.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't think there was that gap, but fine. Okay, that's great. Brooks Lee and Emmanuel Rodriguez that close? That's a little surprising to me. I thought Brooks Lee would be closer to Jenkins than he would be to Rodriguez. Just
That doesn't shock me as a noted Emmanuel Rodriguez detractor.
Great, but I think there's if you're not a Emmanuel Rodriguez believer, which I think there's probably more people that would say that could be skeptical about him, right? To me, it seems like Lee should be closer to Jenkins than he is to Rodriguez. That's it. So really, for me, that's fine. Those are the top 3 in the organization. If you would have told me Jenkins was 18, Lee was 28, and Rodriguez was 50, I would say, yeah, that sounds right. So I'm good with this. This is great. Looking at the Cubs, when I saw you paste that, I thought, well, they must have the best prospect list in baseball, right?
I mean,
You have
definitely top 5.
5 basically top 50 prospects in AA or higher, which means you have they're there on the doorstep, which is crazy. And I mean, 3 outfielders, but center fielder, up the middle Gold Glove type dude. Cade Horton, who is still, the trajectory is still like this way, not so much that way, right? If you're watching, that makes sense. If you're listening, you're like, what is he doing? I think there's so much ceiling left for him yet.
For sure.
Because he's new to pitching, 21, which is crazy. Seeing the other outfielders in there, fine. I would have guessed lower. I would have guessed Matt Shaw would have been a little bit closer to, you say Max Clark is mid-20s. Matt Shaw was maybe the best non-major league debut rookie hitter aside from Wyatt Langford.
Fair.
Right? And so that to me speaks volumes about the Cubs system. Brewers, Trio should be 3 or 2. I'm not as high on the catcher. He came in a trade from, where'd they get him from? Like the Padres or the Nationals?
Keep going. Grab it
because he to me was like, when they got him, like, okay, you always want to be able to add catching depth. Jefferson Cuero, you always want to add catching depth because you never really know. So 26 to me, that seems rich. Mizorowski is a freak, but is his ceiling as a number 2, number 1, or is he a reliever type? I think there's questions there. And so 50, I mean, maybe a little rich, but Lara was the guy that I had. I talked about him before. Little guy, but could be a spark plug. And Tyler Black is now one of a dozen potential third basemen that the Brewers have. And third baseman, right field, first base, DH, like they can all be their own thing. But Uh, for those two, for the whole NL Central, really, that could be a really fun division now for the next
Insane.
handful. 20, not some from 2025 until 2035. That could just be a bloodbath.
Because guess what? Cincinnati also has a ton of guys in this top 100 too.
Right.
Um,
And they've graduated a ton of guys.
and they've graduated a ton of guys. Two quick things before we move on, because I said we weren't going to do it. I said we weren't going to get too distracted by this, and I knew we would because it's super interesting. Obviously, like, depth of talent of the organizations that we happen to discuss is incredible right now, and I don't think it's to be taken for granted. Even the Twins having 3 top 30 guys, whether you want to quibble with the positions or not, I think it's fair to say that, like, globally they have 3 top 50 guys for sure. That's really exciting. I also think that we need to own doing a little bit of a public disservice to Owen Casey, because we have not spoken enough about him on this podcast. And Tyler Black from the Brewers both are kind of knocking on the door. And so we definitely need to come back to those guys when we dig into this top 100 list in greater depth. But that was exactly the desired effect, man. I was hoping to get a good reaction out of you, and your face when I dropped this list in was pretty good. It was a good amount of pleasant surprise. All right, so we're making good time here. So I kind of put the ask out on Twitter for, like, we want to lean heavily into questions this week, and people really, really came through. So big thank you to everyone who asked questions. We got a ton of good ones. We're going to get through as many as we possibly can right now. I'm also going to suggest that, like, some of them were such great questions that they might kind of inspire their own episode later in the off season, because we got a long and cold winter ahead of us. So we'll get to as many as we can. Going to start out with one from Kyle on Twitter, who says, Ben Ross and Jorel Ortega seem mildly interesting. Mildly. I'd say a little more than mildly. K seems to be a problem for both. What do you think their future potential might be? Thanks. Enjoying the new show. So Ben, so Jeremy, why don't you start off on Ross, and then I'll do a little Ortega.
So Ben Ross, 5th-round pick, 2022 out of Notre Dame College. I'm pretty sure when the name came up on the draft tracker, like, there was no information.
Yep, for sure.
Right? And so that was one that's like, oh, must be a savings pick, right?
Mhm.
Must be a $2,000 signing bonus. They just, but it turned out to not be that way. But really an unknown, and the only really report was dude can hit, which should shock nobody, because that's kind of the Twins' MO. Like, let's find guys that can hit, and then we'll see if they can play defense, and if not, we'll plug them into a position that they can learn a little bit, or make them a utility player. But if they can hit, there's value. He's been slow to kind of come around on that. 241 in the short debut season, 239 in his first full year, but has hit for some power, 19 home runs this year.
Nice.
The draft the bat play that they made there is kind of what they've gone for. He's played every position except for catcher, right? I think more first base than you would have thought coming into it, because he was a shortstop, so you'd think second base, third base, shortstop, maybe some center field. A lot more first base than I thought. But I think they'll just continue to try to find a spot for him. There's also a lot of kind of the middle infield depth that exists at those levels, high A and double A. But they're going to give him a lot of time, because the jump from Notre Dame College, which is not the South Bend, Indiana Golden Dome, right? It's some probably little couple blocks in some small town. The jump from that to double A is super significant.
Yep.
And so if you can just let him keep developing, see if he can eventually hit, there's value in that, and then kind of put him into a spot where the defense is needed and can be taught. Because I think if you have an athlete that has played shortstop coming up, you could really fit him anywhere. So an intriguing type, really probably a top 50, maybe a top 40 if you're looking through the right lens, prospect in the system. But when you have the Keichels and the Schobels, like he's kind of that next tier where if we can get a couple, one of these guys out of that next tier, and you'll talk about another guy there to develop, that helps with the whole organizational depth. And I think that's what Ben Ross is, and I think that's what Ortega is too, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, you're absolutely spot on. I think that there's like a kind of like a surplus of these kind of middle infield play on the dirt somewhere guys. So Jorel Ortega is the other guy that Kyle mentioned. So he's a 22-year-old infielder, came out of the University of Tennessee. He was taken in the 6th round in 2021, and he was part of that historic Tennessee team that just absolutely raked and dominated the year before last. They were an incredible team. And he's kind of emblematic of something else the Twins, I think, like to do, which is to target a power breakout. And they did that with Schobel when they drafted him. And Jorel Ortega absolutely raked and had a big power breakout for the Volunteers, play solid infield. I think that, like, his numbers at low A, like, they're exciting, but they don't excite me too much because he played in the SEC, which is absolutely the highest level in college baseball. So at Fort Myers, so he basically split time this season between Fort Myers and Cedar Rapids. At Fort Myers, 279, 396, 480. I mean, that's just dominant at 876 OPS, 6 home runs in 60 games. So a little bit of pop. Moved up to Cedar Rapids and still good production, 233, 326, 410. 8 home runs, and so he's really kind of maintained it, still hitting well. WRC plus is like 110, 115 range, I think, at high A, that is. Strikeouts are pretty high, striking out like 25% of the time, but he does walk a good amount. He's holding like a 12% walk rate, so I think you're probably going to see you might see Ortega start the year at Cedar Rapids and move up quickly to Wichita. He's definitely someone to monitor. It's just a matter of whether he can cut the strikeout rate a little bit, keep the approach of the plate where he's walking a good amount, and kind of limit the swing and miss. But absolutely an exciting prospect in terms of someone who's taken in the 6th round. So definitely someone to track.
So you probably know this better than I do. He didn't play much at Tennessee the year before he was drafted, right? Was he injured or buried on the depth chart?
I would have to go back and look. If I remember, he had one great like half season at Tennessee, or I think maybe his first year he barely played, and then as soon as he became a starter, he had this breakout half season or so. But
then became, shortly after becoming a pro, he was hitting did he break? Was it a hamate or was it a wrist? He missed a significant amount of time. And sometimes, I mean, we've seen it with other prospects, wrist injuries can take a long time to come back, and the hit tool is maybe going to be a little bit slower to come back, the power, whatever it is. And so I think there might be some stuff that we're still maybe waiting on. But yeah, I think you're right when you talk about him that we could see a breakout for sure.
Yep. Producer Theo always comes through. He said 17 games with the Volunteers in 2021 and then 16 games in 2022. So I think that was his big power season, 2022, if I remember, where he clubbed like 15, 18, 20 home runs, something like that.
Did you say 17 games and 16 games?
13 games in 2021 and 66 in 2022.
Yeah. Is that what you said? That's not what I heard.
Oh.
I thought you were like, your eyes must have went cross-eyed and you're reading the wrong numbers. Maybe I'm crazy.
Oh, I said 16 and 17. See, look, this is what happens when I'm in the Eastern time zone. I need to go to bed. It looks terrible. All right, let's keep going. Alex on Twitter asks about the upcoming international free agency period, which opens in January.
Yeah, so I'm still not a huge fan of the January international signing period. I get it. It's a calendar thing now. But I really enjoyed the July signing period because it was when the draft was in June and then you'd get that. Anyway, that's a good question. But I think as it gets closer to January, teams or maybe the league is trying to keep things more under wraps because usually it's like, hey, here's the upcoming signing period that's going to start in 7, 8, 9 months, and here are who these teams are going to sign with, or the players are going to sign with. So we'll spend much more time on this question, talk about the whole process, the bonus pools, how teams treat their bonus pool, and if they take a lot of big swings or take a lot of small swings, and then the general sense of how each class looks because it's different from year to year. So fun question, but certainly not one that we want to spend too much time on today, but one we'll spend a significant amount of time on over the next
multiple episodes coming on that, Alex. Thanks for the question. Let's see. He also asked a follow-up question about Noah Miller. Does a good end to the season mean he can and should start 2024 at AA? So I'm going to do a little context, and then I want your thoughts too, Jeremy, here. So Noah Miller was a competitive balance pick from 2021. Good example, I think, of not writing off a prospect too soon, right? I have heard so many people on Twins Twitter whine about Noah Miller not being able to hit and not giving him a chance to develop his hit tool. He's 20. He's young for high A. So I just want to read off some splits. OPS by month: May 538, June 472, July 695, August 823, September 728. So if we parse that out by first half, second half OPS a high A 564, second half was 729. So while 729 is not lighting the world on fire, that is a really significant improvement. Also noteworthy with Miller, I think, 16 defensive runs saved, which led all of minor league baseball, regardless of position. And that is against an MLB standard, aka that is 16 defensive runs saved on the same scale by which you are judging Carlos Correa. So an incredible defensive shortstop, especially strong going to his left. If it was me, I would start him in Cedar Rapids. And if you're seeing a repeat of the kind of strong end of season numbers, then move him up to Wichita. But given that he's 20, I would not be in any particular rush. What are your thoughts on Miller?
Okay, so whenever a guy gets drafted from Wisconsin, I'm a fan of that.
Hey,
right. However, I was never a huge fan of Noah Miller because he wasn't the same as these other Wisconsin prospects that we've seen, the Gavin Luxes, the Dalton Varsho, there's been a lot recently. Noah Miller, for me, just doesn't do it. Anyway, he's a one level a year player so far. Boom, boom, boom. Wichita would be his next stop. And you say, you've seen how he's not a hitter. For me, the truth is that he's not much of a hitter, right? I don't think he'll ever really be much of a hitter. I'm not ready to just write him off. I don't even know if I don't have him in my top 20. I don't think I would have him in my top 30. He'd be maybe a back half. I think there's guys with upside, hitting upside that I would maybe like a little bit more. I think what you hope he can be is in the infield what Michael A. Taylor was in the outfield. A really, really strong defender that you pencil into the 9 spot and don't give up defense. At 20, he's going to develop some power, and we've kind of seen that. But I think you're hoping in the 9 spot that he gets a hold of one, or he walks and is able to do some damage going from first to third, stuff like that. he's great defensively, and he will be, but I don't know that the ceiling is there to be a first division regular, which means he's either going to have to go somewhere else, and he's going to have to be in Oakland A or Las Vegas A or whatever they're going to be, or be just a utility guy, which has value, but I don't think you ever want to take a comp round guy and then be like, well, he's a utility guy. Nick Gordon was like the 5th overall pick and ended up that. That's been disappointing. So this is a little bit smaller scale. But for me, the ceiling is just not there. Hope I'm wrong. Just don't think I'm going to be.
Now I want to go back and look at the other comp picks from that 2021 draft. Maybe we'll do that another time. Okay, yeah. Let's move on. Next question from Josiah Waldner. What prospects, if any, and I'm putting you on the spot with some of these because we got a ton more questions this morning. So you can throw it right back to me if you want. What prospects do you like for the Twins to send to Driveline? P.S. Pablo Lopez was at Driveline today, already doing an offseason assessment. What prospects do you like for the Twins to send to Driveline to work on stuff, bat speed, etc.? Anyone come to mind for you that you would like to see go visit Washington?
I think not one, but it's maybe been a common thing for me. That Colonel's class of pitchers, the 2022 pitchers, the Lewis, the Culpeppers, the Morris, the group, the whole group. I would love to see all of them go and get a peek behind the curtains at who's going to separate themselves. Because I think I like Lewis. Culpepper's a guy that had kind of the ups and downs. Matthews was kind of the same. I think a lot of upside there, but if you can go unlock a little bit more, that class is could be historic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really early to say. I mean, they were at high A this year, but if you get 5 major league pitchers out of that group of 5, that's unheard of.
No way. Yeah.
Right. And so I would like to see that group pushed because I think they feed off each other. I mean, that's how it appears to the outside people like us.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could get them in a room this winter and start pushing each other even more, that's only going to breed more success. Pearson Ole would be another guy.
Ooh, interesting.
David Festa, like those types of guys. And I'm looking at the pitching side of things because I think that's ultimately where you want to develop that and see what you have. But those were the names that immediately popped into my head because I'm seeing these questions really for the first time. So
I'm kind of impressed. A good off-the-cuff answer. Speaking of that Cedar Rapids rotation, we are working on a guest for next week who might be able to speak to said Cedar Rapids rotation in a lot more depth. So stay tuned for that. I think my answer to this would be, we got a question about Ben Ross. Ben Ross is really interesting to me. He strikes out a lot, 116 Ks in 103 games at high A. So I'm wondering if that's about contact rate or swing decisions. He's the guy that I think jumps out for me, but I love your answers. I think they're great. The Twins had a bunch of major league pitchers last year, so would be interested to see if we see any more of those Driveline kind of promotional videos this offseason. All right, from Wisconsin fan, maybe your kindred spirit, Jeremy. From Wisconsin fan on Twitter, is there a single starting pitching prospect in the Twins organization that projects as a major league starter in the next 2 years? Anyone spring to mind for you?
So I think there's the obvious choices, who are the higher prospects that are up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I see those names here. David Festa. I think you're pretty high on him as a guy that's going to be a depth piece and maybe Louis Barland-ish next year.
Yep.
Marco Raya. There's so many question marks, but he's exciting. And is he gonna? How does that fit? I don't know because of his innings being so limited. Is how that really works. The
Yep.
name I just mentioned, Pearson Ole, I think could surprise some people
It's a great
because
one.
he gets promoted. He has a rough outing, and then he just flips the switch, and he's so good. Um, and then it becomes who separates themselves in that next group. If that
Mhm.
Cedar Rapids group becomes the Wichita starting rotation, at any time, any of those guys could come up. And I think Corey Lewis is the first natural choice for me in that group,
Mhm.
uh, as more of the durable, like number 4-ish starter, that still has ceiling. Um, but there's a huge group which hasn't really been the case ever before, right? I
Yep.
think back to the years of Anthony Swarzak and Kyle Gibson and Jose Barrios and Nick Blackburn, Scott Baker. Like I think we just encompass like 15 years of 100% of the guys that the Twins have developed. And now it's like it's just it happens and it happens in the Bailey overs and Joe Ryan wasn't necessarily the case, but there's just so many potential guys that's a really fun question because I think we could probably come up
It
with a
is
list
fun.
of 13, 14, 15. The reality is that some of those guys are going to become really good bullpen guys like Griffin Jacks. Think back to Tyler Duffy. He was a lights out starter down the stretch
Mhm.
when the Twins just missed the playoffs and then became a really good bullpen arm. And so
Yep.
I think that's what's going to supplement this bullpen. And you're going to have the types of players that it's like, oh, he was 92 as a starter and wasn't great. Oh, now he's 98 as a starter with a nasty slider, and all of a sudden we got another eighth inning guy. That's going to be the fun part of watching these guys develop.
For sure. Pearson Ole is a great shout. I love that pick. I wish I had his numbers up in front of me, but he had an incredible end to the season in Double A. I do want to quickly come back to David Festa and Marco Raya because there were names that kind of immediately sprang to mind, maybe as more obvious choices. So here's why I like Festa. He's 6'6", 190 pounds. There is room to add there, right? Um, in Double A this year, he struck out over 30% of hitters. He carried that over into a small sample size in Triple A, struck out 28% of guys. Um, Typically, he's only walking, if I'm looking back to Single A, 6% of guys, 8% of guys. So that combined with the stuff and the velocity, I am really bullish on him. I think he's going to be a low end top 100 prospect on lists coming into the spring. Marco Raya, I also want to real quick talk about if I can find my splits, which maybe I have now
Are the splits
closed
you're
out.
looking for the 3 games that he pitched consecutively where he got like 1 out and gave up 7
Yeah.
runs?
So, so
Good job,
basically, so
Raya.
so he's promoted to so he's an undersized guy. He's promoted to Double A as a 20-year-old, right, which is aggressive. In his first ballpark, in his first 16 innings in Double A, he gave up like 16 earned runs. It was looking really bad. In his last 9 innings in Double A in 2023, he didn't give up an earned run and struck out 11 guys. He really started to put it together, and the Twins have kind of protected him by having him go out in shorter starts. I just think there's a ton of upside there with the age at his level, with his stuff. He has like absolutely nasty breaking pitches. And I do think it's going to be a little bumpy because he's been young for every level that he's been at. But Marco Raya is absolutely a candidate to be knocking on the door at the end of 2024, in my opinion. And I think David Festa is a lock to make his major league debut in 2024. Write it down,
Lock.
pencil
Yeah.
it in. It's a lock. It might be in the bullpen, might be as a starter,
I
but
think it's great. A bullpen type guy that transitions, I think would be a phenomenal thing to
okay,
do.
so Theo is, as usual, providing us with the gold content in the chat. So Raya had 1 earned run in his last 16 innings of the season. That is locking it down. Um, Pearson Old, 269 ERA across 87 innings at Double A. That is wild, and you're absolutely right. We should be talking about them more. 100%. Okay. This is a question for you, man. I feel like you're the person to answer this. From Takes on Twins on Twitter, he says, in my opinion, or they say, in my opinion, there are two main positions of uncertainty where we need to clean up who is starting: first base and second base. Where does Polo go? Where does Polanco go? Is Alex Kirilloff a starter at first or only a platoon option? What are your thoughts?
So I pick up Polanco's option and
Mm-hmm.
I reinsert him into second base. Um, that to me is pretty easy. He should start 110 games at second base next year. Um, this is all contingent on Byron Buxton when healthy enough to play that he can play center, because Eddie Julian will be my DH for 85 games, maybe 90, maybe 100, and then he will play second base on games where I'd have Polanco play third, or Polanco. I still believe Polanco could play short if needed. If Farmer's gone, um, he could be that backup shortstop, or Royce Lewis could play short. Polanco could play third, but I would have Polanco play shortstop 2/3 of the time. I would have Julian play it sporadically, but also DH. I think Julian could play some first. However, the thing here, which kind of segues into this who should play first base question, Alex Kirilloff is going to start a lot of games against righties, and then, as we saw, him and Julian just won't play a ton against lefties.
Mm-hmm.
It's a competitive team, and I think you want to develop that skill, because it took forever for Kepler to hit lefties, and then it took Kepler like a year to just hit again, or 3 years. So I think there's some flexibility there, but I would say Polanco's a starter again, Kirilloff's a starter at first, but you know that this team is going to use guys that are versatile.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's okay if that outfielder comes in and plays first base. It's okay if that third baseman goes out and plays center field, because that just it makes your 26 roster spots go that much further. And so that's really how I feel about Polanco. He's going to be the second baseman. Julian's going to be the DH and second base. And I think that's how it's going to work. Theo says he thinks Lewis is more likely at short than center to start the season. I would get that. I really truly always believe that Royce Lewis is better suited for center.
Agreed, but it doesn't look like that's happening in the immediate future. This is a question that is going to be, as Theo points out in the chat, much more easily answerable in spring, because the other factor here is going to be injuries and health of guys. And I think we also tend to, when we answer this, we tend to assume that like Brooksley is just like ready to go, and I think that's going to be more of a midseason thing, as much as we might like it to be otherwise. A couple more, and we're going to save one of these for next time. Question from Twins Central on Twitter, which we're not going to fully answer today, but want to give a shout out for the question. Can you guys do a buy sell segment on prospects, kind of like who you're bullish on, who you're more worried about? That's a great question, and we will, I think, do an entire episode on that, covering all three orgs sometime over the winter. So appreciate you for sending that in. John Lano asks about outside. I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Jeremy. Outside, this is a good question because it kind of stumps me a little bit. Outside the Twins' top three position player prospects, Jenkins, Lee, and Erod, who do you think other teams value the most on the position player side, wondering for possible off-season trades? So you got to throw out all the pitchers, and you can't say Brooks Lee, Walker Jenkins, or Emmanuel Rodriguez. Is there a position playing prospect that you think would be an attractive trade target for other organizations this winter?
So the Twins would be buyers, right? They're looking to get
Mhm.
big league ready help. So I'd have to answer that question from that perspective. Like they're not looking to trade off their current major leaguers for prospects, right?
Right.
They're going to be buying players, and the
Right.
player the hitter that I'm guessing would be asked about would be uh, any of their younger, like recently signed international guys.
Mm-hmm.
So Yasser Mercedes, Jose Rodriguez, the youngest Acuna, probably because his last name's Acuna. And then I think there's Byron Chiriot. Those would be my guess. Those would be the top four,
Mm-hmm.
in whatever order you prefer them. I think MLB.com has Rodriguez as their number 10 overall prospect.
Mm-hmm.
Danny D. Andrade would be another name, although
Mm-hmm.
he's probably, he's a couple levels ahead. He'll be at high A next year. Those types of players, I would guess other organizations would be most likely to ask about because the ceiling is the highest. That's how the Padres got Fernando Tatis, right? That's the type of deal that other teams would look to make. If you're dealing with the Twins, you're giving up something that's going to be ready for a bunch of lottery tickets. Um, Guys like Jose Salas, his prospect star kind of dimmed
Oof.
a little bit because he was
Rough season.
trash. Um, but that to me is where my mind immediately goes.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I need to think more on that, man. John, you stumped me a little bit there. Because I do really believe that like you're not trading any one of those top tier prospects you mentioned. And I think other teams would tend to focus on the kind of excess of pitching depth the Twins have, especially that kind of tier that's in Cedar Rapids right now. We'll hopefully be moving on up to Double A sometime next year. Last question. Ooh, you want to read this last question?
Do
Um,
you want me to read it?
yeah, read it out. I gotta prepare for this answer. It's a great
Okay.
question. I loved it.
Michael on Twitter, who are 3 to 5 prospects outside the updated top 20? And now Theo's typing. Representatives of each level that have a potential to make a name for themselves in 2024.
Love this question because I think the Twins farm system is a little underappreciated in its depth. So here's a couple guys that I would keep an eye on. Rookie ball this year. Jeremy just mentioned this guy, Jose Rodriguez, signed for $650,000 in the 2022 international free agent class, right? So one of those kind of middle tier priced guys that the Twins like to target. He's a 15th overall prospect of the Twins on Baseball America. Surface numbers from 2023 weren't great. 262, 325, 412 with a 91 WRC press. That's fine. That's okay. But his 90th percentile exit velocity was 103.1. That is really, really strong. Max exit velocity 108.7. Really, really solid. Contact percentage of 73.6%. That is a nice, solid platform for a good hit tool and a plus power tool. So Jose Rodriguez is a guy I would be keeping an eye on, guessing he's going to be at Fort Myers at some point in 2024. A guy who played at Fort Myers this year that I'm going to highlight is Ricardo Olivar, international free agent, same class as Erod, but he signed for $20,000. That's like Luis Ariz signing bonus money. Also out of Venezuela. Here's a weird thing about this guy. He has played catcher and center field. Not a ton of guys play catcher and center field. He played 100 games at Fort Myers in 2023. Here's a triple slash. Really impressed by this. 285, 403 on base, 453 slug for 855 OPS, 10 home runs, walks 13% of the time, strikes out 20% of the time, which is not bad at all. A 136 WRC plus at low A for a catcher center field guy who plays solid defense is something I'm awfully excited about. And he just hasn't gotten a lot of shine. So He's a guy I would keep an eye on.
Yeah, he's certainly flown under the radar.
Yeah, for sure. I was like shocked when I looked up his end of season numbers. Last guy, I think our friend Tom Froming will appreciate. I think he cited this guy as maybe the most underrated Twins prospect, and that's Andrew Morris, part of the lauded 2022 pitching draft class. He was actually the 4th rounder, so the highest drafted of these guys out of Texas Tech. Pretty much like every single person who was a pitcher in that draft, he pitched at Fort Myers and Cedar Rapids in 2023. Just like really good, man. At Cedar Rapids, like 50-ish innings, 25% K rate, only walked 5% of guys. Like what? He's a ground ball guy, so 51% ground ball rate. That was up to 55% at high A. Didn't quite hold the same strikeout numbers at high A, but 334 FIP and a 328 ERA in 35 innings at high A to end the year. Just one of like 5 dudes who had an incredible debut season. Andrew Morris, guessing he'll probably start at Cedar Rapids and be up at Wichita at some point in 2024. But just yet another really, really impressive Twins arm. They're a pitching org, man.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. Who would have thunk? All right. I think that's going to do us. We're a little over time here. So let's wrap it up for the week. Want to finish by thanking you guys for listening. Thanks as always to producer Theo, who was informing us that Jake Cave is up for the Phillies, which must mean that things are going poorly for the Diamondbacks. Thanks to producer Theo for keeping things going. Ways that you can support the show: retweet the episodes, download them. Appreciate anyone for doing any of that. Thank you guys so much for sending in so many questions. We got like an hour's worth of questions today, so we really appreciate it. It was really fun. And got to finish by saying, stay tuned. Pending confirmation, we have a pretty exciting guest lined up for the middle of next week. I'm going to make sure we put the opportunity out for folks to ask questions and be a part of that. Not going to drop who it is till it's confirmed, but we're pretty excited for this time next week, man.
It's going to be fun.
Going to be fun. Don't want to miss it. Until then, Jeremy, have a great rest of your week, my man.
You too.
Later.